the idea. So it's very difficult to know exactly what the active ingredient is in this kind of studies that I just talked about. So one thing that I started by is saying that there's a contingency between the location of the probe and the location of emotional information in the active condition, and there's no contingency, it's 50-50 in the other condition. Well, that's a good way, it's a good proxy for what the mechanism is, because you're kind of building this contingency, but you really want to know, is the bias itself changing across tasks and across trials? And there's nothing built into that task that tells you that. Also, previous studies didn't really monitor this dose on a kind of continuous way. So I showed you pre-post data, but it's not really that clear that you had a nice kind of learning curve that you would expect if that's what it is. So people couldn't really examine some of those things. People did do some mediational analysis, and I don't know how much you guys have covered things like mediational analysis, but mediational analysis allows you to examine mechanism questions. So if the group membership, active versus control, is accounted for by how much bias change, that's kind of promising. And indeed, yes, the mediational analysis suggested that it's important to show that the bias changes. It's not just what group you're in. So that's nice. So how do we actually go to the next stage in terms of kind of a most parsimonious approach? And one idea would be for us to basically measure bias in a continuous way and make sure that the participants are kind of reaching their goals, what it is that they're supposed to get to. It may be useful to look at things like overall response latency. We have people that are very fast, people very slow. Again, the traditional methods don't care about that. It'd be important to look at things like accuracy, initial level of bias, rate of change, all things that you would learn or you would kind of pay attention to any kind of study. And then finally, the probe detection test does not really differentiate between training away from negative or towards positive. If you remember, there was two phases. One was negative and one was neutral. So are you looking towards the negative or are you looking away from the positive? You can't differentiate those two because they're both on the screen at the same time. There are other paradigms that might be more kind of useful at allowing you to do that. And again, this is an example from medicine where these medical interventions really focus on the dose, the active dose of an ingredient. So if you're finding out, for example, why people have diabetes, you start giving them insulin, and you try to titrate the insulin, not just by giving everybody the same level. I had a former postdoc that used to be in my lab, and he used to say he always has to adjust his insulin level right around grant submission times because things would get stressful and he had to kind of pump up. So he was kind of administering the right dose to himself, not that he was just on that. So similarly here, could be a number of parameters like I just talked about affect how people learn. And if we don't take those things into account, then we're going to pay a price later. So we moved on to this thing called an adaptive attention bias modification. And the adaptive part had to do with the fact that you would be kind of measuring everybody's bias on a continuous way and trying to see what the effect of that are. This is one study we did that just came out last year with 14 people with social phobia. We're trying to kind of replicate that old one in terms of the length of the study, et cetera, but it was an open trial. It used this exogenous spatial cueing task, which I'll show you in a little while, and it tried to address some of the issues I brought up. So one thing was that everybody selected their own word, their ideographic words that were positive, negative, and neutral. So we wanted to make sure the training is for that person specifically. It had different kind of word types, positive, negative, and neutral, and had two phases. In the practice phase, they were just learning the task. In the training phase, they could only move up if their bias moved. So we wanted to make sure that if they got to the end of this paradigm, by definition, they've gotten the active ingredient. It's not that they could do this task without paying attention to it. This is what it looks like. It's very similar. This is a bunch of screens on the same figure. But basically, what happens is that you get one of your words, and the word is either valid or invalid. You get kind of cues like you see on the right-hand side, the cue is green. On the left-hand side, the cue is red. The idea was that we would actually start training them to look on top or bottom. Remember when I was showing you the first one, I said, there's two faces here, but we don't really tell you which one to look at. Well, this kind of told them implicitly they should be looking on top or they should be looking on bottom. And we started graphing their bias on a continuous way. So this person has done about 160 levels, it looks like, and each level is defined by 1 millisecond change in their bias. So this is very nicely titrated to exactly what we think the ingredient is. It's not that we're just showing something happening before and after. And you can see it's a very nice, smooth figure as they're going through this test. This is now those 15 people I told you about, and you see by and large people were able to manipulate their negative bias, and this is just another way of kind of applying that data. Also manipulating the positive bias. So they were able to reduce their negative bias, and they were able to increase their positive bias independent of each other. And this is just the combining of those two. So this was very interesting, but we were kind of still staying within the behavioral domain, which is that we're trying to get people to respond differently based on their reaction time. At this point, we started kind of getting into this other types of methodologies, one of them being transcranial magnetic stimulation. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that and our other attempt at kind of going even deeper in terms of mechanism, because what we think we're doing in these bias manipulation studies is changing the way that people are reacting to emotional information. One way of indexing that is people's reaction time, how fast are they? But there are other ways. I mean, Axel and his lab have been using things like fMRI, which allow you to look at magnetic, responses in the brain. Transcranial magnetic stimulation is kind of exactly the opposite. Instead of you kind of collecting magnetic data, you're actually inducing magnetic data. The idea being that the brain is an electromagnetic system. So if you induce a magnetic field, then you are inducing an electrical current, and there something should happen. I was very, very shocked that people let me do that, because it seemed like it was brain surgery. And basically, I got a little machine and we zap. And of course, I have this rule in my lab that if we do anything, I should do it first myself. So I sat in the chair, and somebody put this thing on top of my head, and they zapped me, and you just kind of jump up, and it's like, that's not good. But that was the first that was the first study that we did. And there are kind of ways of doing this now that, like I said, were not really possible to do maybe 50, 60 years ago. fMRI studies suggest that you can kind of manipulate the anterior cortex, or you can measure the activity in the anterior cortex, and this has something to do with attention. And I just spent 20 minutes telling you about how we're interested in attention, so why not, instead of doing all these behavioral tasks, not just go in there and start poking it and see what happens there. There are both inhibitory and excitatory ways of kind of activating that network, so we wanted to see if we can do that. Adam Arendt, who's one of our colleagues at UCSD, is very kind of influential on this. So we started kind of our first studies using TMS at kind of trying to reach the exact same goals. Can you actually show those same type of changes in bias by directly manipulating the brain? And I'll show you a picture of what the machine looks like, but this is kind of a depiction of what it does. It's a non-invasive procedure. You can just do it with basically, and very low risk in terms of what it does to you, because the effects are very short-lasting. Induces a pulse on the scalp that induces an electrical field, causing neurons to basically depolarize. When this occurs in the motor cortex, and that's one of the advantages of this, is that you can literally see it. And we use the hand, people have used the leg and other muscle groups as well. And again, I'll show you a picture of all these things. But if you actually are in the right kind of motor strip, you actually go click, and you see your hand go like this. So you can see there's a direct kind of relationship. This allows us to kind of directly investigate the cortical activity. What happens when cortical activity is manipulated? So we are not really, it's actually interesting because a lot of people in exercise physiology and other domains use this for actually kind of muscle movement studies and things like that. We really don't care about muscle, we care about emotion. So the question is, does emotional information modulate this response in any shape or form? And the answer seems to be yes. I just put up one of those studies up there, but it seems that when you have emotional information, it affects the magnitude of this response that you have. And one explanation for that is that emotional information really kind of primes the motor system, and you can actually look at the effect of this. We use something called MEP, which I'll define for you in a minute. And this MEP increases as the TMS pulse is presented closer in time to when your response is. And these data suggest that emotional stimuli can modulate action readiness. So the goals of this series of studies was, first, in the short term, can we actually use TMS to modify or modulate that emotional responding in one of our tasks that we have? And of course, we always have the lofty goal of, if you can do this in a short-term laboratory setting, can you then do it with patients to change it? And again, everything I've talked about, including this, we're not the only ones that are doing it. Other people have kind of done this with depression and anxiety and those kinds of things. The task that we used was very similar to the one that I just showed you. So people do that same task with the faces on top and bottom. And the question is, what happens if you actually zap the brain right before they have to actually do this task? So this you've seen before, they're doing that. In most of our tasks, people actually use a mouse to respond. In this one, because you actually care about which hemisphere you're kind of providing the pulse to, you want to get responses from both fingers.